It's Thursday, June 11th, 2020. This is the Hermetic Hour. I'm your host, Poke Runyon, and tonight we present a discussion on the pagan Hermetic origins of the Sepher Yetzirah. This ancient book is the philosophical and mystical foundation of the Medieval Hebrew Kabbalah, and eventually the Hermetic Qabalah, which it actually seems to recover its actual origins because it was Hermetic before it was Hebrew. It is traditionally attributed by the Hebrews to Father Abraham back in 1800 BC, and was said to have been written by him in Harran, where he is said to have made souls. Now, the Harranians were star worshippers who preserved the star lore of ancient Babylon and eventually joined the Pythagorean Hermetic magical tradition. The Sefer Yetzirah, or Book of Creation, describes how the universe was created by the Word of God, using the proto-Hebrew Phoenician alphabet, the first alpha-numeric letter system, which acquired 24 letters to accommodate the entire celestial sphere and the elements, and then became the origin of ancient Greek, which passed on its alphanumeric heritage to medieval Hebrew and Arabic. It has even been suggested that the 2nd century Valentinian magician Marcus, or perhaps the Neoplatonic philosopher Proclus, wrote the earliest version of the Sepher Yetzirah. Well, even Gershom Scholem admits that the philosophy of the Sepher Yetzirah is Pythagorean. So, if you want to delve into the depths of the mysteries, join us for an hour of speculation on the origins of the Book of Creation. Now, regular listeners to the Hermetic Hour will recall that we have often discussed the Sepher Yetzirah as the earliest known book of the Kabbalah, believed to have been written and circulated in the 3rd century of the Common Era. Now, this Book of Creation established the philosophical structure called the Tree of Life and defined the magical alphabet, attributing the 22 letters of Old Hebrew alphabet to the planets, the zodiac, the signs of the zodiac, and the elements, air, water, and fire, called the mother letters from which the rest derive. Although alleged to be Hebrew philosophy, this concept was defined by the Greek Pythagorean philosopher Empedocles in the 5th century BC, who declared that life, the cosmos, and reality were made up of air, water, fire, and earth, and held together by love and moved by strife. This and the astrological macrocosm reflected in the human microcosm became the key principles of the 1st century Hermetic philosophy. This Hermetic philosophy was incorporated into the teachings and rituals of Marcus, the 2nd century Valentinian Christian magician, who applied the letters of the Greek alphabet to the signs of the zodiac, and, according to some scholars, Marcus was the original author of the Sepher Yetzirah, and the father of both the Hermetic and the Hebrew Kabbahs. In order to make this more understandable, we need to dispel some popular misconceptions. First, Old Hebrew was not alpha-numeric. That's without a numeric analog, you have no Kabbalah. In other words, if the letters don't mean a number, then you have no Kabbalah. All right. Phoenician was alphanumeric, and Greek evolved from Phoenician. Hebrew acquired its alphanumeric equivalents from Greek in the 1st centuries of the Common Era. Now, how do we know this is true? Well, when the Septuagint, the 3rd century BC Greek version of the Torah, was translated back into Hebrew, Greek letters were used for the numbering the chapters. Old Hebrew had no numerical equivalents. Therefore, it is a fair assumption that the original version of the Sepher Yetzirah was written in ancient Greek by Proclus or Marcus or another Hermetic adept. The Greek alphabet had 24 letters, which gave it enough to accommodate the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 7 planets, and the 4 elements, the 4 mother letters of the original Tetragrammaton. But when the lost original of the book was subsequently rendered into Hebrew in the 3rd century, this lack of enough letters to fill out the creative elements of the Tetragrammaton resulted in an exercise in philosophical gymnastics which removed Earth from the original generative formula and reconstituted the chaos of an incomplete creation by sealing the universe with Yah, a form of Yahweh, to replace Amesh as the original God formula. Now let us consult with the 2 foremost authorities on Kabbalah to substantiate these claims. I will read from Gershom Scholem's Kabbalah, that's his big Kabbalah book, pages 25 through 28, to substantiate our original claims about the original Tetragrammaton. These are the words of Gershom Scholem. The text offers no more detailed explanation of the relationship between the Sephirots and the letters, and the Sephirot are not referred to again. Some scholars have believed that 2 separate cosmogonic doctrines, basically differing one from another, were fused in that book and were united by the method resembling a Neo-Pythagorean theory, current in the 2nd and 3rd century BCE, of the Common Era, before the Common Era. And the real beings in the 3 strains of the cosmos, in the world, in time, and in man's body. In the language of the book, world, year, soul, came into existence through the interconnection of the 22 letters, and especially by way of the 231 gates, in effect the combination of the letters in the groups of 2, representing the roots of the Hebrew verb. It appears that the author held that the Hebrew verb is based on 2 consonants. The logical number of 231 combinations does not appear in the earliest manuscripts, which fix 21 gates, in a combination of which are enumerated in a number of manuscripts. Every one existing thing somehow contains these linguistic elements and exits by the power whose foundation is in one name, the Tetragrammaton, or perhaps the alphabetical order, which is entirely considered one mystical name. The word process is essentially linguistically one. The first contains the 3 matrices, emote, containing the elements in the language of the Mishras, Aleph, Mem, Shin, which in turn represent the source of the 3 elements mentioned. In a different context in chapter 1, air, fire, and water. And from these all the rest come into being. These 3 letters also have their parallel in the 3 seasons of the year, according to a system found among Greek and Hellenistic writers. Get that now. See, he says, according to a system found in Greek and Hellenistic writers. And the 3 parts of the body, the head, the torso, and the stomach. And of course, this is the psychic center system. And the second group consists of 7 double letters, and those consonants which have a hard and soft sound when written with or without a dagesh or the gimel dates. The presence of the dates and the group give rise to various theories, though the medium of the double letters were created, which created the 7 planets, the seven heavens, the 7 days of the week, and the 7 orifices of the body, the eyes, the ears, the nostrils, the mouth. And they also allude to the basic opposites in man's life. The 12 remaining simple letters correspond to the author, correspond to what the author considers man's chief activities, the 12 signs of the zodiac in the heavenly sphere, and the 12 months on the 12 chief limbs of the body. And in addition, he gives a completely different phonetic division to the letters in accordance with the 5 places in the mouth where they are articulated. This is the first instance in which this division appears in the history of Hebrew linguistics, and it may not have been included in the first version of the book. Get that? Yeah, in other words, they're feeling their way into this thing, because when they started, they didn't even have they didn't even have numeric equivalents. By the way, I apologize for this copy of Kabbalah that I have. It's about an 8-point type. It really is. It's an old book, and it's about 8-point type, and I'm really having difficulty getting reading it. Basic letters contains the roots of all things, and also the contrast between the good and the evil. There is an obvious connection between this linguistic mystical cosmology, which has these parallels in astrological speculation and magic, which is based on the creative magical powers of the letters and the words. In fact, it might well be said that the Sepher Yetzirah speaks of the letters in which heaven and earth were created. According to the Talmud, the architect of the tabernacle possessed the knowledge of their contributions, and from this point stem the ideas connected with the creation of the golem by an ordered recitation of all the possible creative letter combinations. Whether Sepher Yetzirah itself initially was aimed at magical ideas of this type is the subject on which opinions differ, but it is not impossible, according to a Talmudic legend used to occupy themselves with the Sepher Yetzirah, as an ancient variant has it. The Hilchot Yetzirah, by means of a calf 3 years old, was created for them, and which they ate. They generated a calf and ate it. Whether these Hilchot Yetzirah are simply the book in question or its early version cannot be decided for the moment, but it must be stressed that accompanying the very earliest texts of the Sepher Yetzirah were introductory chapters emphasizing magical practices which are presented as some kind of festive ritual to be performed on the combination of the study of the book and the commentary. Now, the time of the composition. Zunz, Greats, and his later works, Boucher, Bloch, and others, were of the opinion that the Sepher Yetzirah was composed in the period of the Geonim, around the 8th century. Thus, dating was in the line with the general tendency of these scholars to assign a late date to the composition of the mystical works on the mysteries of the creation of the Merkaba, a trend which modern scholarship can no longer uphold. They also talked of hypothetical Arab influence, which was not actually proved. In this early work on Gnosticism and Judaism, 1846, Greats tended to correlate the time of the composition with that of the Mishnah, or the beginning of the period of the Talmud. And this view was shared by Abraham Epstein, Louis Ginsburg, and others, who dated its composition between the 3rd and the 6th centuries. Leo Baeck tried to prove that the Sepher Yetzirah was written under the Neoplatonic influence of Proclus, possibly in the 6th century. The Hebrew style, however, points to an earlier period. Epstein already proved its proximity to the language of the Midrash, and addition can be made to the linguistic proofs. The book contains no linguistic form which may not be ascribed to 2nd or 3rd century Hebrew. In addition, a number of links with the time of divine wisdom and the various Gnostic and syncretic views indicate an earlier period. Analogies between the Sepher Yetzirah and the views of Marcus, the Gnostic of the school of the Valentinians, had already been noticed by Grams. I want to read that again. Analogies between Sepher Yetzirah and the views of Marcus, the Gnostic of the school of Valentinius, had already been noticed by Grams. The doctrine of the Sephirot and the language system hint at Neo-Pythagorean and Stoic influences. Stoic is the emphasis on the double pronunciation of the Magad, and some of the terms employed in the book were apparently translated from Greek. Get that. Some of the terms employed in the book were apparently translated from Greek, in which the term, and this is Greek and I can't read it, indicates that both elements and letters of this duality finds its expression in the Hebrew term yot yosod, elemental letters, in effect, letters which are also elements. The material which F. Domsheaf collected from the linguistic mysticism of Greek syncretism contains many parallels with the Sepher Yetzirah, illuminating in this connection the Sepher Yetzirah's view of the sealing of the 6 extremities of the world by the 6 different combinations of the name YHW, which, unlike in the Bible, occurs here as an independent fundamental name of God, playing a part in its corresponding name in Greek transcriptions, which is extremely frequent in the documents of the Gnostics and in religions and magical syncretism. The idea that every act of creation was sealed with the name of God is one of the earliest tenets of Merkaba mysticism, and is already found in Hekalut Rabbati, in Gnostic systems, and some which are close to the Gnosis. This name has its function in establishing the cosmos and in defining fixed boundaries for which combinations of the name, which in Greek consist of vowels and not of consonants, appear frequently in Greek magical papyri. The author of the Sepher Yetzirah did not yet know of the symbols for the Hebrew vowels, and in place of the Greek vowels, he employed the Hebrew consonants, which are both vowel letters and components of the Tetragrammaton. There is a common ground between the speculations of the Sepher Yetzirah and the projection of Gnostic or semi-Gnostic speculation on the fringe of Judaism or outside of it during the early centuries of the Common Era. It is difficult to decide whether the 10 Sephirot of the rules of the 32 paths have been expanded or understood in the spirit of the Gnostic Aeon, the doctrine, or in that of the Pythagorean school, both views being possible. The function of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet in the construction of the world is mentioned in the ancient fragment from the Midrash dealing with the creating the Holy One. Blessed be he who said, I request laborers, the Torah, and him I put at Yanni's disposal 22 laborers, namely the 22 letters which are in the Torah, and give to each one his own. This legend is extremely close to the basic idea in Sepher Yetzirah chapter 2. that it is impossible to know which was the earlier. To sum up, it may be postulated that the main part of the Sepher Yetzirah, though it contains post-Talmudic editions, was written between the 3rd and the 6th centuries, apparently in Palestine by a devout Jew whose aim was speculation and magical rather than ecstatic. The author, who elaborated to Judaize non-Jewish speculations, which suited his spirit. That's kind of a key sentence there, because this is basically, what Scholem is saying, that the guy who took it, who took what we suspect was a Greek original of this thing, and when he put it into the 22-letter Hebrew alphabet, he had to really do some monkeying around with it. The author, who endeavored to Judaize non-Jewish speculations, which suited his spirit, presents a parallel path to Jewish esotericism of the Hekalat type of literature, which has its roots in the same period. This Judaizing is also apparent in the end of the book, which presents Abraham, the first to believe in the oneness of God, as the one who first studied the ideas expressed in the book and actually practiced them. Maybe an allusion to the use of magic mentioned above. And from this derived the late view claiming Abraham was the author of the book, called in several manuscripts Otayot de Abraham Avin. The edition of Sepher Yetzirah only makes its appearance in the Kabbalistic literature from the 13th century onward, no doubt in the wake of the late Midrash. That is that's going to be enough of Gershom Scholem for a while, but that's very, very, that's very informative. I said we were going to use Scholem to back up everything we had said about this originally being a Greek, a Greek document. To substantiate our claims about the original Tetragrammaton, let me read from Ira Kaplan's Sepher Yetzirah, pages 140 through 142. Now let me explain about Gershom Scholem, as many of you may know, was probably the world's greatest authority on Kabbalah, but not how to practice it. Gershom Scholem was not a practicing Kabbalist. He wasn't a magician. He wasn't a Kabbalist. He was a scholar, and he was a scholar of Jewish mysticism. And so that's one of the reasons why what I just read was, aside from it being in such small type, what I just read was very, very academic, because Scholem is very academic, but he was also very honest, because he was kind of, I think he was kind of reluctant on admitting that this was originally a Greek book. Now, the important thing about Ira Kaplan is that both Scholem and Kaplan just passed away a few years ago, but Ira Kaplan is probably the best practical Kabbalist. Kaplan is a mystic and a magician, and he actually kind of believes that Abraham really originally wrote it, because one of the things about Kabbalah is that as we know, belief is a form of yoga, like bhakti yoga, and so if you got legends like Abraham wrote this book, then you reinforce your power by believing it. Okay, so this is Ira Kaplan's chapter 3 of the Sepher Yetzirah. And the Sepher Yetzirah says, 3 mothers, Aleph, Mem, and Shin, the great mystical secret, covered and sealed with 6 rings, and from them emanated air, water, and fire, and from them are born fathers, and the fathers' descendants. And now Kaplan's commentary on this. A great mystical secret. The word for mystical here is mufala. This is very closely related and shares the same root with the word peliyah, used in relation to the 32 paths of wisdom. One reason for this, as discussed earlier, is because it was through these mother letters that one can enter into the realm of Hokmah, consciousness, which is the portal to the transcendental. These three mother letters are also related to the mystery of the divine name. The Sepher Yetzirah earlier said he chose three letters in the mystery of the three mothers, Amasha. Thus, the numbers Amasha are the roots of the letters of the Tetragrammaton, YHV, according to the Kabbalists. Yud is derived from Mem, He from Shin, and Wow from Aleph. These three mothers therefore represent an even deeper mystery than the Tetragrammaton. The Tetragrammaton actually only relates to the 10 Sephirot. There is, however, an aspect of creation that existed before the Sephirot. In this stage, the proto-Sephirot existed as simple, non-interacting points. In the language of the Kabbalists, this is known as the universe of chaos, Tohu. In the state of the vessels, which were the proto-Sephirot, and could neither interact nor give to one another. Since they could not emulate God by giving, they were incomplete, and could therefore not hold the divine light. Since they could not fulfill their purpose, they were overwhelmed by the light and shattered, and thus known as the breaking of the vessels. The broken shards of these vessels fell to the lower spiritual level and subsequently became the source of all evil. It is for this reason that chaos, Tohu, is said to be the root of evil. Yeah, this is where they get the cliff-hop idea. The shells fall down into the cliff-hop. But the cliff-hop is not Christian Tartarus. It's not Dante's Tartarus at all. They're not similar at all. After having been shattered, the vessels were once again rectified and rebuilt into personifications, partsofim. Each of these partsofim consists of 613 parts, paralleling the 613 parts of the body, as well as the 613 commandments of the Torah. These partsofim were then able to interact with each other. More important, though, the Torah, they were able to interact with man. And this is the stage where the Sephirot became givers as well as receivers. And this, of course, is the microcosm, the replication of the universe in the human body. In this rectified state, the vessels or Sephirot became fit to receive God's light in Kabbalistic terminology. This state is called the universe of rectification, Tikkun. Kabbalists teach that the letters of the Tetragrammaton, YHV, only pertain to the universe of rectification. In the universe of chaos, Tohu, the divine name consisted of the letters Amasha. And by the way, it's just to mention that they kind of got this into the Torah, and eventually the Samaritan Torah got written with this. But whenever a Samaritan priest sees YHVH in his Torah, he pronounces it Shema. When a person enters into the mysteries, he must I'm telling you that, not Ira Kaplan. Ira Kaplan probably wouldn't. When a person enters into the mysteries, he must parallel the sequence of creation. First, he enters the universe of chaos, Tohu, and here his mind is filled with confused and transient images. And if he perceives the Sephirot, they are like lightning, running and returning. And the Sephirot are perceived as disconnected images, where no relationship between them can be seen. This is the state of consciousness attained through the letters of Amasha, as discussed earlier. The initiate can then enter the universe of rectification, where the Sephirot are connected and assume the form of Partzifu. Each Partzifu is a human-like form. and closely related to the conception to the letters of the name YHVH, together with various letters as described in Chapter 2. This is the name associated with the universe of rectification. And by the way, this rectification was part of what the author, the author who retranslated the Greek into Hebrew. This part of what the manipulations that he did. Here one must combine all the Sephiroth to form a single body. One also becomes aware of the lines connecting the Sephiroth, which are included in the 32 paths of wisdom, and hence when one of these 32 paths are discussed, the Sepher Yetzirah uses the names YH and YHVH. The three mother letters Amashah also spell out the Hebrew word Amesh, and this is really important. The Hebrew word Amesh, meaning yesternight. This occurs in the verse, "You slept last night, Amesh, with my father," in Genesis 19:34. The word Amesh also denotes deep, impenetrable gloom, as in the verse, "Gloom Amesh," waste and dissolution. This is the inky gloom that existed before creation. It is the universe of chaos, the yesternight before the Sephiroth were brought into being. There is also evidence that the word Amesh was also used as a mystical name of God. Thus, Laban said to Jacob, "The God of your fathers last night, Amesh, said to me." And this can just as easily be read, "The God of your fathers, Amesh, said to me." Similarly, Jacob said, "And Amesh gave judgment." According to some authorities, the letters Aleph, Mem, Shin also conceal a deeper mystery, which is Aleph, Vav, Yud. Another element of the mystery of the letters Amesh is the fact that they represent the reconciliation of opposites. Logically, there is no way in which opposites can be reconciled. These letters therefore represent a mystery which cannot be penetrated by logic. One commentator states that the letters Amesh contain the mystery through which one can walk on fire. And the reason that this may be is because these letters have the power to reconcile opposites. And it is possible that Rav Zera made use of this technique to prevent his feet from being burned in fire, as is related in the Talmud. So, basically, what we get from that is that the Tetragrammaton originally was air, fire, water, and earth, and then they eliminated earth because they didn't have a letter for it, and so they ended up having to create these machinations to complete it. Now, before leaving the question of original authorship, we should look at the traditional belief that Father Abraham wrote the Sefer Yetzirah and used it to create souls while sojourning in Harran. Well, let us again consult Rabbi Kaplan, who lends more credence to traditional belief. Let's go back to Ira's introduction. I'm very fond of this Abraham legend. I like it. Okay. The earliest source to which the Sepher Yetzirah is attributed is the patriarch Abraham. As early as the 10th century, Saadia Gaon writes that the ancients say that Abraham wrote it. Opinion is supported by almost all of the early commentators. Such ancient Kabbalistic texts as the Zohar and the Rezil also attributes the Sepher Yetzirah to Abraham. A number of very old manuscripts of Sepher Yetzirah likewise begin with a colophon, calling it the Letters of Abraham our Father, which is called the Sepher Yetzirah. This does not mean, however, that the entire book as we have it was written by Abraham. As Saadia Gaon explains, the principles expounded in Sepher Yetzirah were first taught by Abraham, but they were not actually assembled in a book form until much later. Another authority notes that it could not have actually been written by Abraham, since if it had, it should have been incorporated into the Bible, or at least be mentioned in Scripture. Similarly, when the Zohar speaks of the books antedating the Torah, it does not include the Sepher Yetzirah among them. The Sepher Yetzirah were first taught by Abraham, but they were not actually assembled in book form until much later. Another authority notes that it could not have actually been written by Abraham, since if it had, it should have been incorporated into the Bible, or at least be mentioned in Scripture. Similarly, when the Zohar speaks of books antedating the Torah, it does not include the Sepher Yetzirah among them. The attribution of Abraham is supported by the final stanza of the Sepher Yetzirah. When Abraham looked and probed, he was successful in creation. This passage clearly suggests that Abraham actually made use of the methods found in this text. In many editions of the Sepher Yetzirah, scriptural evidence is provided by the verse, Abraham went as God had told him, and Abraham took the souls that they had made in Harran. According to some commentaries, this indicates that Abraham actually used the powers of the Sepher Yetzirah to create people. This would be the earliest example of the use of the Sepher Yetzirah to create a golem. According to this, Abraham would have learned how to use the mysteries of the Sepher Yetzirah before God told him to leave Harran. Other authorities, however, say that making souls refers to converting them to belief in the one true God, and this is also supported by the Zohar. And some of the commentaries attempt to reconcile this with the text of the Sepher Yetzirah, explaining that with the miracles wrought through the Sepher Yetzirah, Abraham was able to convince people of the power of God and thus convert them to true belief. The scripture states the souls that they made in the plural. This would indicate that Abraham was not alone in his use of the Sepher Yetzirah, but had a companion. A midrash states that if Abraham would have engaged in the secrets of creation by himself, he would have gone too far in emulating his creator, and therefore he had worked together with Shem, the son of Noah. Ancient sources identify Shem with Melchizedek, who blessed Abraham and taught him many of the earlier traditions. And of course, Melchizedek was a priest of the Most High God, Elyon, not Yahweh. The most important mysteries of Sepher Yetzirah involve the inner significance of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Here, too, we find that Abraham was a master of these mysteries. A midrash states that the letters were given to none other than Abraham. As we shall see in the commentary, the arrangement of the animals when Abraham made his covenant with God also appear to be based on the mysteries of the Sepher Yetzirah. Further support linking Abraham to the Sepher Yetzirah is found in the Talmudic teaching that Abraham had a great astrology in his heart. This is important, and that all the kings of the East and the West arose early at his door. You know, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out what that means. Sepher Yetzirah is one of the primary ancient astrological texts, and it is possible that it incorporates Abraham's astrological teachings. The fact that this astrology was said to be in his heart might also indicate that it involved various meditative techniques, as was indeed the case of ancient astrology and was also suggested by the Sepher Yetzirah. There is evidence that these mysteries were also taught to Abraham by Shem, along with the mystery of the calendar, Sod Halabur. When God revealed himself to Abraham, one of the first things that he taught was not to be over-dependent on astrological predictions. Abraham, also fully aware of the magical and idolatrous uses that could be developed from these mysteries. The Talmud thus says that Abraham had a tract dealing with idolatry that consisted of 400 chapters, and there is also a Talmudic teaching that Abraham taught the mysteries involving unclean names to the children of his concubines. This is based on the verse, to the sons of the concubines that Abraham had, Abraham gave gifts, and he sent them away to the lands of the East. And these gifts consisted of occult mysteries, which then spread in Eastern Asia. The attribution of the mysteries of the Sepher Yetzirah to Abraham would place its origin in the 18th century, before the Common Era. This is not very surprising, since such mystical texts as the Vedic scriptures date from this period, and there is every reason to believe that the mystical tradition was further advanced in the Middle East than it was in India at that time. And since Abraham was the greatest mystic and astrologer of his age, it is natural to assume that he was familiar with all the mysteries of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Abraham was born in Mesopotamia, and he also lived in Egypt. Okay. Now, I have some comments on that I think are worthwhile. Okay. Even while we recognize the apparent influence of Pythagorean and Hermetic philosophies, let us retain the ancient sage of Abraham. Let's see here. I said, even while we recognize the apparent influence of Pythagorean and Hermetic philosophies on the Sepher Yetzirah, let us entertain the idea that some ancient sage like Abraham may actually have written the Sepher Yetzirah. It would have been written on clay tablets in cuneiform. Cuneiform was not an alpha-numeric alphabet, but it did include a numbering system and would have been similar to the other books the Harranians would have been custodians of. They were custodians of the Sumerian and Babylonian astrology and astronomy. And Abraham came from Ur, down in Mesopotamia, down southern Iraq, from Ur to Harran, and thence to Canaan, where he met Melchizedek, the priest of the Most High God, and received the blessings of God, Elyon, before moving to Egypt. Now, the sequence ties up several mythical and historical themes and motifs that relate to the Sepher Yetzirah. The connections are so compelling that we are romantically encouraged to imagine an ancient set of clay tablets from which one of our Harranian magicians translated the cuneiform into ancient Aramaic or Syriac, and a Jewish scribe then rendered it in Hebrew in the 3rd century, the Common Era. Now, personally, I prefer the theory that Marcus the Valentinian, who gave us the celestial Kabbalah of the Summa Sophia, wrote and translated the original Sepher Yetzirah in the same Greek alphabet he used to create the Summa Sophia, and that it was subsequently retranslated into Hebrew and had the tetragrammaton distorted to become Yahweh rather than Elyon, and thus created the Hermetic Qabalah. Now, that is just about wraps up what we have on the Sepher Yetzirah, but I would like to mention that when I first got started in magic back in 1969, one of the first things I had to acquire was a copy of the Sepher Yetzirah, and I immediately got Kalish's version, which had a very nice 7-pointed star, 7-branch candlestick on it, on the front of it. Then I discovered, as I got further into it, got into Agrippa and the Golden Dawn, and no version of the Sepher Yetzirah agreed. They were all different. Well, somebody finally explained this and saying, "Oh well, it was such a powerful book that none of the rabbis that had their different versions of it would put down the actual ones. They did it in cipher." Well, maybe that's true, but the most important thing the Golden Dawn did, the Golden Dawn straightened out the attributes of the Sepher Yetzirah. The one that they based their tree of life, the Minutum Mundum, on, is the one that we all use. That's the paths that are attributed to the planets and tarot cards and everything. That Golden Dawn version of the Sepher Yetzirah is the one that the entire Hermetic Qabalah now uses, including ourselves. As I say, we have to give the French Magus, Eliphas Levi, the Victorian age Magus, we have to give him credit for it. He's the one who straightened it out. And in doing so, he got the erroneous idea that the tarot preceded the Kabbalah, which is not true at all. But the Sepher Yetzirah is a tremendously important book. It is a tremendously powerful magical book. I hope that this has stimulated your interest in it. As I said, it is the original tetragrammaton, a mesh, or Shema, or a mesh. That's the original. And so until next week, take care, be well, and good magic.